Welcome to the Jay Martin Show, where we dissect the greatest minds in geopolitics and finance so that we can better interpret the world. My guest today is Jim Rogers, Renaissance man, world famous investor, best-selling author, Guinness Book of World Records holder, and much, much more. I was really excited to pick Jim's brain today on how he is processing and interpreting all of the global conflicts that we're watching unfold before our very eyes, and where he is putting his cash in response, where he's looking for opportunity. Fascinating conversation. You're going to enjoy this one. For anybody who is looking to become a commodity investor, to build a portfolio of commodity investments, check out thecommodityuniversity.com, a 10-chapter video course that my team and I have assembled to give you all the tools you need to get your start. Thecommodityuniversity.com. Now here is Mr. Jim Rogers. Enjoy.
This is Jay Martin.
Here I am with Jim Rogers. Jim, it's great to have you back in the program. I really appreciate you making the time.
I am delighted to be here, Jay. Good morning where I am. I guess it's good evening where you are.
It is good evening, yes. Just after dinner on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest. Now, here's where I want to start with you today, Jim. You're one of the most traveled human beings on the planet. And you've also invested all over the world, a true Renaissance man. With your life experience, both traveling and allocating capital, for multiple decades internationally, when you look at the array of global conflicts right now, seemingly on every corner of the earth, are you able to make some judgment calls on, where emerging opportunity might be? Or is it too chaotic at this moment for you to make any judgments like that?
Well, I hope it's never so chaotic that I can't make judgment. There are usually nearly always opportunities somewhere in some asset. It may not be in Microsoft, but it might be in cotton or something else. It might be in Uzbekistan. There are many places and opportunities in the world usually. I like to see the world. I'm a little nuts. I like it to experience all of it and see it all. And one of the things I have found is the more you see, the more opportunities you might find. But back to your earlier question, there are several small wars right now. And historically, small wars often turn into big wars eventually. If you look back at 1912 or a few previous times in history, these things have a habit of expanding and erupting. I hope not. Certainly, I hope not this time. But it has happened historically.
Would you draw any correlation? I know that you've been calling for the next American recession to turn into a global recession and to be the worst that's occurred during your lifetime. Would you draw any correlation between that economic outlook and the global hot wars that are erupting around the world?
Well, first of all, just to be clear about what I've said, we've had bear markets for thousands of years, and I guess I live long enough to hope I live long enough to see many bear markets, because they always come, whether we like it or not. Politicians sometimes say, "Oh, we've done away with bear markets." Don't believe them. We will always and have always had bear markets. Now, as I look at the world now, I see a lot of small wars, and historically, small wars have a habit of turning into big wars. Let's hope it doesn't happen this time, but it always has. And you rightly point out that there are situations around the world now, and if it develops as history shows it will, we're leading to a big war sometime in the next year, 2, 3 years. I don't know when, I don't know where, but I know it has happened. Now, stock markets and nearly all markets around the world are very happy right now. Many of them are making all-time highs, and that's because central banks have and are printing a lot of money. And when there's a lot of money printing, people have a good time. You look at the Bank of Japan, it's staggering how much money they've printed and how much they've spent and borrowed. Likewise, the central bank in the United States, everybody's doing it. So there are a lot of good feelings at the moment. But Jay, history shows that when everybody's having a good time, it's time to start thinking about, hey, wait a minute, is this going to ever come to an end? And it probably will.
So if we continue to see escalation then in terms of hot conflicts around the globe, obviously hot war in Europe, hot war in the Middle East, a couple civil wars in the Sahel region of Africa, rising tensions in the South Pacific, et cetera, and now, economic wars that are heating up again between the East and the West, I might gravitate towards maybe things like nickel, copper, probably fertilizers, agriculture products, maybe grain, things like this. Do any stand out to you right now, Jim, as maybe smart places to park some money?
Well, I have a lot of cash, and I have a lot of cash in U.S. dollars at the moment. I'm not selling short, not yet, because I don't see the hysteria that you usually see at the top. It's developing, but I don't think I see hysteria yet. So I am not selling short. I'm just sitting here in cash, mainly in U.S. dollars, because history shows that when people are panicked, they turn to the U.S. dollar as a safe haven. It's not a real safe haven anymore, Jay, because the U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. But people still think it's a safe haven. So what I suspect will happen, when problems come again, people will jump in the U.S. dollar for safety. It will make a peak. I hope I'm smart enough to sell that peak if it happens that way, because the U.S. dollar is very flawed. The U.S., it's unbelievable, the debts in the U.S., and it's unbelievable the way they keep increasing the debts. They think there's no problem.
So listening to you, it sounds like you believe the markets are getting a bit too hot, a bit too fun, attracting a lot of money, probably spontaneously, but it's not quite at a time where you're beginning to sell short or put those trades on. So maybe the party can keep going for a bit longer. There's an election coming up in short order. Does that have something to do with it?
Well, you more or less said exactly the way I see the world right now. Yes, the election certainly has something to do with it, because politicians try to make people happy when there's an election coming, and the way you make people happy is spend money, build things, whatever. And that's happening again. It will happen again. It will always happen that way.
Now, your comments on the U.S. dollar, that in times of turmoil, people tend to sell whatever they can and flood to the U.S. dollar. And so you're sitting on a lot of U.S. dollars right now. What are your thoughts on that cycle and how many events have occurred in the last 3 years that may have brought us closer to the end of that cycle? I mean, all world currencies eventually come to an end. They always have, they always will. Any thoughts on what inning we might be in today?
Well, timing the end of a 100-year cycle is pretty difficult, at least for me it is. But it is certainly, I see the signs are developing. Many people put nearly all of their money in U.S. dollars. It's becoming more and more of a safe haven in people's minds. But the facts are the U.S. is a huge debtor nation, and the debts are getting higher every day. That has never led to good things. In the end, if a nation becomes a huge debtor, it ultimately leads to problems. Yes, I own a lot of U.S. dollars at the moment because I expect people to turn to the U.S. dollar in terms of turmoil if it comes again. And the dollar will go higher and I'll have to sell it. But I don't know where I'm going to put the money then, Jay. If you know, please don't announce it. Send me an email. Send me a private email, because I'm trying to figure out where to put the money next. Which currency, if there's another currency. And I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, that was sort of my next question is, do any assets or currencies stand out to you to be in a position to rival, not as a replacement for the US dollar, but as a decent second choice? We've seen record central bank buying of physical gold as one maybe example. But does anything stand out to you, Jim, as a potential best second choice for safe haven?
Well, in theory, it should be the Chinese renminbi, but the renminbi is not a convertible currency. So it cannot be the currency that's not convertible. That can never be the world's international medium of exchange. So I haven't found it yet. I am looking, as I say. Every currency I look at has its own peculiar problems. Someday we're going to have to get out of US dollars, but I don't know where to go yet. And I certainly own some gold and I own some silver, but they are not going to be the international currency.
All right. So when you look at the commodities market, Jim, does anything stand out to you as ignored, hated, undervalued right now?
Well, there's nothing that's quite that bad at the moment. I mean, agriculture is certainly not popular. Nobody wants to be a farmer these days, which means we should probably all be farmers. But no, I don't. I mean, silver has been down. Gold's making all-time highs, but silver's still down 40 or 45% from its all-time high. It's been moving recently, but silver, I guess, silver is certainly one of the perhaps undervalued commodities that I see in the world, and most agricultural products are somewhat neglected.
And when you say agricultural products, are you talking about, potash and fertilizers, or where are you looking?
No, I'm talking about things that people produce and trade, corn, wheat, cotton. These are the things that there are futures markets in. There's no future. I don't think there's a futures market in potash. At least there hasn't been that I know of.
How do you interpret the central bank gold buying over the last 24 months, setting 50-year records? There's a lot of talk about central banks pivoting away from the US dollar. Does that make sense to you, or is that overthinking it?
Well, I think most people know that the US dollar has serious problems. We are the largest debtor nation in the world, to repeat myself. I'm not the only one who knows that. And the debts keep going up every day, every week, every month. So many central banks are starting to notice that. Also, Washington recently, in recent years, has started saying if they don't like you, they put sanctions on you, they won't let you use the US dollar. Well, even our friends are saying, wait a minute, they could do that to us too. So many people, including our friends, are starting to look for a competitor to the dollar in case something happens. And they should. We all should. I am. And then I'm an American. But I have not found yet the place to go that the world is going to go to. Central banks are increasing their holdings of gold because historically, for thousands of years, gold and silver have been places to put money as a refuge. Well, again, I'm not the only one who knows that. Many central banks are starting to increase their holdings of gold because they know that if the U.S. gets angry at them, they're going to have a problem.
Yeah, that's been a big part of the conversation for the last couple of years. If there was a way to play devil's advocate, could you look at that situation where the United States sanctioned $600 billion of Russian USD reserves and say, yeah, that was reckless. They sent a message to the world that said your US dollar reserves are no longer safe, and that was foolish. But the other side of the argument, could it be that the United States needed to send a super strong message to the world that nobody is safe from US sanctions, and so the world better get in line because the global chessboard is about to be reshuffled, and you don't want to cross us? Would that be, what do you think about that?
Well, that's certainly the way Washington is thinking, and what they're trying to do. They want to make sure that everybody knows that the U.S. is in charge, and they better do what the U.S. says. Yeah, that's their plan. But as I say, some people are starting to say, wait a minute, that could happen to us, and we have to find an alternative, because if it happens to us, what are we going to do? Nobody wants to be stuck with all of their money frozen and unable to do any kind of commerce. Nobody wants to be in that situation. And Washington's recent actions make many people, including our friends, say, we have to be prepared in case.
What are your thoughts on the health of the Chinese economy at present?
Well, the Chinese economy got hit by a gigantic housing bubble and by the virus, the COVID virus. So they got a double attack. It is bouncing along. I mean, that's making a bottom. In my view, it is making a bottom. It's not just a down and up a kind of bottom. It's a bumpy bottom. And in my view, the Chinese economy is bumping along at a bottom and making a bottom, but it's not as I say, it's not a 1 week bottom. It's going to take some time for the bottom to work its way out, as has often happened in world history.
Now, if I'm quoting you correct, I've heard you say in the past the 20th century belonged to the West, the 21st century will belong to the East. And I believe you were referring to China. Do you still hold that conviction?
Well, China is certainly the largest economy in Asia, and it has certainly made dramatic progress in the last 30 or 40 years. So, and it is now the second largest or largest economy in the world, depending on how you measure. And I don't see much that's going to, yes, China will certainly have problems as the world develops, but I don't see anybody else that can rival China as the most important economy in the world in the next few decades. If there's somebody else, please let me know.
Right. And is this, if I were to pull on that thread a little bit, is that making the assumption that they will take the global power torch from the United States? Or are you looking at this more like a multipolar world for the next generation?
Well, throughout history, there's always been somebody on top, and there have always been people rising and others declining. So we're just seeing history repeat itself. The U.S. has been the number one economy in the world. The Chinese have been rising and are rising. They will continue to rise. But if you look at U.S. history, we had some terrible problems along the way. We had some huge depressions. We had a big civil war. We've had bankruptcies. But still, the U.S. became the most successful country in the world. China will certainly have many problems as they rise, but I don't see anybody else that is going to rise to replace the U.S. except possibly China.
Okay. And so forgive me if I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but you might be saying that it's too early to count the United States out simultaneously. Is that correct?
Well, in 1924, Britain was the number one country in the world, the richest, most powerful. I mean, they're still there. It's 100 years later. They had gigantic problems along the way. They went bankrupt at one point, but still, they're still there, and there's still a lot of people having great success and making money. So the U.S. is not going to disappear overnight, I assure you. Nobody ever has. No country that has lost the pinnacle has dropped, unless they lost a war or something, has dropped immediately. The U.S. is not going to drop immediately. Don't worry.
And the
U.S. dollar is not going to drop immediately. Even as people move away from the dollar, and I'm trying to figure out where to go myself, I don't know where they're going to go. So the U.S. dollar won't disappear overnight. Don't worry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. It's good because in macro, especially, it's seductive to talk about the collapse, of the global empire, the collapse of the United States, the collapse of the world reserve currency. And it's strikes me, it's easy to get sensational because people are drawn to that, but it's rarely how history has ever played out in those cataclysmic events. However, it's often the most dominant conversation.
Well, unfortunately, history showed there's always been some cataclysmic events. Usually war is the most cataclysmic. And the world has not figured out a way to eliminate war. I mean, war is pretty foolish, but still human beings do it, have repeatedly done it. And that may be the next cataclysmic event. I see these small wars developing. History shows that small wars sometimes turn into big wars. It could happen again. And so if it does, the next time it's going to be very bad because there are lots of money and lots of weapons scattered around the world.
Yes, there is. So your portfolio right now is, you mentioned that you're heavy cash. Where else are you heavily exposed at present?
Well, I'm looking at China because China is depressed. China is not going to disappear. I haven't found anything recently. Uzbekistan, I've been buying shares in Uzbekistan. Not too many, but I'm hoping to buy more in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan, a few hundred years ago was one of the most successful and powerful countries in the world. The communists ruined Uzbekistan, but now there are different people trying to change Uzbekistan, and it has vast resources of many kinds. But other than Uzbekistan and perhaps China, many stock markets are near all-time highs, Jay. And when that happens, I, anyway, don't particularly like jumping into markets at all-time highs. And everybody's having a good time. The U.S. has gone the longest period in American history without a big bear market. That doesn't mean it's going to have a bear market soon, but we always have. After such a long time, we have had bear markets, and we will probably have them again.
I think you're probably right. When you look at Argentina and the changes that the newly elected Javier Milei is implementing, does it make you optimistic on Argentina's future? He's got the country back to a surplus, a government surplus. He's eliminating government jobs by the thousands. What's your take on Milei, and is he going to make a difference?
Well, I read the same thing you do. Yes, he's saying some intelligent things. He's taking some intelligent actions. And Argentina is a country that has a lot of resources. The only worry, I've seen this happen several times in Argentina. If you've gone back 100, 150 years ago, Argentina was, if a European was thinking about going to the Western Hemisphere, they were trying to decide between the U.S. and Argentina. Those were the two choices. Those were the two great potential success stories. Obviously, the small ones went to the U.S. because Argentina has gone bankrupt a few times in the intervening times. But Argentina has had some great success at times. There was a time that if you were in Europe and somebody walked into a restaurant or something, people would say, there's a rich Argentine, because they were that well known and that successful. Unfortunately, they often then went the other way.
And so with this new president, I know a lot of people, Stanley Druckenmiller recently, Elon Musk, another, saying this is a pivotal turning point for the country and the worst years are behind it. Yes, 100, 150 years ago, it was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Is it too soon to say that's probably the direction it's headed here, or is that putting the cart before the horse?
Everybody who says this is right. I can read the same thing they do. It is happening. I just am cautioning people to realize this is not the first time. I've seen this rodeo before. And let's hope that Argentina 100 years from now will be one of the great success stories of the world. Historically, it has happened before in Argentina. It has never lasted. Maybe it will this time. I don't know any reason that it will not, except that it never has.
If you weren't raising your daughters in Singapore, Jim, where would you raise them, if not where you're at?
Well, I wanted my daughters to speak Chinese because, in my view, in their lifetime, China is going to be the most successful, or one of the most successful and strongest countries in the world. Therefore, I wanted them to know Chinese. I don't know another. I guess if there were another, I guess Spanish would be something that they should know and be fluent in, because Spanish is spoken in a lot of countries. But I guess I don't see anybody besides China on the horizon, or Mandarin on the horizon. Maybe Spanish, but Chinese is what I've taught my children, and I've taught them about Asia. You can ask me in 80 years whether I was right or not.
Do you ever consider moving back to the United States?
Well, of course I do. I am an American citizen, a taxpayer, voter, of course. But at the moment, we're happy. I mean, we live in Singapore, which is a very, very efficient country. It's a very easy place to live. Everything works in Singapore, so we're quite happy here. Maybe they'll throw us out, or maybe Singapore will make serious mistakes. But at the moment, I don't see any reason to leave. Of course, we think about the U.S. We're Americans, but at the moment, we don't leave.
Any other countries in Asia, like maybe Indonesia? Any thoughts on Indonesia as a place to relocate? Not necessarily for you, but just for Westerners in general.
Well, Indonesia is a country with huge resources, and it's been badly managed for decades, but now it seems to be changing. Everything I read about Indonesia in recent weeks, months, indicates that they are beginning to change and to do the right things and to manage the country properly. So yes, Indonesia has huge resources, a large population, and a good location. So it could well be a great success again. Korea, once Korea opens and becomes one country again, it's going to be extremely exciting and prosperous. But other than Korea and Indonesia, well, maybe Vietnam. Vietnam is moving in the right directions. It's got a good location. It's got a large population. And it's a population that's more or less homogeneous, which is usually good if you have a country. But other than Indonesia, Korea, Vietnam, those are the main opportunities. I mean, India, of course, is changing finally. For the first time in my life, the Indian government seems to understand what should be done. They've often said things, but this time they seem to understand it and mean it. So that's another name on the list. There are a few countries, and there's a lot of people in Asia, as you well know. I mean, there are gigantic numbers of people out here. So that often leads to an opportunity as well.
Can I ask, what do you read on a daily basis to ensure you feel caught up with what matters?
Well, I guess the single most important thing for me to do that is the Financial Times, which historically has been an English newspaper. The Japanese now own it. I'd say the Financial Times would be, if I could only have one thing, that's what I would want to have.
Would you mind walking me through a little bit of your morning routine when it comes to the work side of your life?
Well, if I get up in time, I take my daughter to school. She can certainly get to school on her own now. She's 16. Actually, she goes to the top school in Singapore, top girls' school, and she was recently, to my shock and delight, elected president of the student council. She's the only Caucasian in the school, and it was amazing. I'm very proud, but I'm shocked. She was elected president of the student council. But we take her to school, or she gets to school on her own. But then I basically start reading the Financial Times, if you will. I read a couple of newspapers to see what has been happening in the world. I try to exercise every day. And by then, and while I'm exercising, I can use my computer, to check the world and check email and things like that. By then, it's lunchtime.
For a young speculator trying to get their start, would you have any tips or recommendations, Jim, for where they might look or how they might approach what you approached so long ago?
Well, when I was first starting out, I saw these older, more experienced and educated people. I thought they knew what they were doing. I thought they certainly knew more than I did. Didn't take me long to understand they didn't know what they were doing either. And, the world is full of people who invest who aren't really good at it. So I learned that I had to figure out my own way. I certainly made a couple of mistakes. At one point, I made a gigantic success. And few months later, I lost everything. Typical beginner in the markets. But what I learned and what I have learned is everybody has to figure out their own way and pursue their own way. Don't listen to other people. Do it your way if you want to be successful. And it's not easy. I have learned, Jay, it's not easy. It looks easy. Everybody can say, I could have bought Apple. No, if you could have bought Apple, why didn't you buy Apple 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Everybody thinks it's easy, but it's not.
It seems like a relatively liberating thought or realization when you said, you saw these older folks who were speculating. You assumed they were very smart. You came to realize most of them weren't. They didn't know what they were doing either. And I think is that a pretty empowering belief to have, to realize, everybody's making it up. So it's okay that I don't know either. I can figure this out just like anyone.
Well, I hope that everybody comes to the realization that, yes, I have to figure it out myself. Does that mean you will get it right? No. I certainly did. I made mistakes along the way as I was learning, as I came to that realization, and I figured I have to figure this out for myself. But even then, I made mistakes along the way. Everybody will, no matter who you are and how good you are. I don't know a magic wand. I have never found it. At one point, I was a professor at a famous business school, and all the students always wanted to know, which chapter should I read? Which page? Which page has the answer? Everybody, and I would have to say to them, there is no chapter 3 with all the answers. There is no page 37. This is not easy. It takes a lot of work, and there's no simple answer. And if you know a simple answer, Jay, send it to me. Don't broadcast it.
Yeah, will do. Sure, you made a lot of mistakes. Your successes have more than amortized those. That's for certain. If you were to chalk up those successes to a couple character traits, does anything stand out? Like, you mentioned work ethic, curiosity, boldness. Do any stand out to you, Jim?
Persistence. Just don't give up. It takes a lot of digging to figure out what is correct and accurate, and just don't give up. Persevere, persevere, persevere. Most of us don't like to persevere. It's work. We all want an easy answer. I want to be rich this weekend too, but I have experienced enough now to know it's not easy, and it's going to take a lot of work.
My kids are younger than yours by a bit of a margin. I'm curious if you've unlocked any secrets to teach or encourage perseverance to your kids.
Well, you will save the world if you can teach everybody perseverance. No, I don't know a trick or an answer, except somehow or another, I seem to have taught my children to persevere. Maybe it's mimicking us, their mother and me. I guess that's the only answer, is to set good examples. Young people mimic their parents. They notice what their parents do, whether parents know it or not. Kids certainly mimic and observe and follow their parents. So setting a good example is the only thing I can tell you.
Any book recommendations? And your books they qualify if you want to go there.
Well, certainly I like my books. I like the lessons I have learned and try to pass those lessons on. But also, my books, I didn't set out to be a writer. I set out to have adventure. And then I wrote about the adventures, and people seemed to be interested. So I guess my answer is have adventure, see the world, and then tell people about it. That's what I try. That's what I didn't set out to do that, but that's how it has evolved. And I certainly still like adventure and to see the world.
I love that. Look, I really appreciate your time tonight, this morning, in your case. coming on the show, coming back on the show and getting in front of my audience, allowing me to pick your brain. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's always fun. I guess you have to go to the disco now, but I have to go read the Financial Times. Okay, you have fun at the disco. See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.